A disrespectful cop frames a 16-year-old black girl. Then the DOJ reveals in court who her father is. Are you serious right now? Brianna Coleman barely had time to react before the harsh grip of Officer Keene yanked her backward. Sirens blared, flashing red and blue lights painted the quiet street in chaos. We got her, caught red-handed, Keene sneered, holding up a plastic bag filled with stolen prescription drugs. Brianna's heart pounded. That wasn't hers. She hadn't stolen anything. But before she could speak, before she could even defend herself, cold steel handcuffs locked around her wrists. Framed, accused, trapped. But Officer Keene had no idea who he was messing with, because when the truth came out, when the courtroom learned who Brianna's father really was, justice would hit back harder than he ever expected. Stay tuned for this unbelievable story. And if you love powerful twists and real justice served, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's dive in. Brianna Coleman was 16 years old, ambitious, and full of life. She lived on the outskirts of Crestwood, an old town in North Carolina that seemed frozen in time. The narrow roads were canopied by towering oak trees dripping with Spanish moss. The area looked picture-perfect to outsiders, but Brianna knew better. Underneath the quiet charm lay tension, the kind of tension that could turn the innocent into scapegoats with the snap of a finger. Brianna lived with her single mother, Laura Coleman, in a modest but lovingly cared for two-bedroom house. Laura worked as a nurse at Crestwood General Hospital. Every day, Laura came home exhausted but greeted her daughter with unwavering warmth. Brianna had grown up watching her mother's resilience and love, and it shaped her own dreams. She wanted to be a lawyer someday, a drive that came from witnessing injustice around her neighborhood and longing to right those wrongs. Crestwood High School wasn't just the place where Brianna excelled academically. It was also where she was the star forward of the girls' basketball team. She was quick on the court. Lightning-fast layups and sharp passes made her a local icon in the making. Her coach, Miss Bennett, often told her she had the gift to go far, maybe even land a scholarship. Yet, in the back of her mind, Brianna always felt something missing. Growing up without her father wasn't easy. Laura had never been very specific when talking about him. She only mentioned that he was a good man, forced by circumstance to leave. Whenever Brianna asked for more details, Laura's eyes filled with a complicated mix of sorrow and pride. One day, "Baby, you'll understand," she would say, gently holding her daughter's hand. Brianna did her best not to dwell on that void. She was too busy focusing on her grades, playing basketball, and volunteering at the local youth center. Life had enough hardships. A father-shaped hole was just one more weight on her shoulders. Instead, Brianna tried to channel any sadness into productivity and positivity. But even in Crestwood, not everyone shared the same spirit of perseverance. The local police force had a history of friction with minority communities. Rumors of intimidation or outright brutality were whispered in barber shops, living rooms, and at church events. Yet very few official complaints ever made it through. People were scared that speaking up would bring worse consequences. One officer in particular carried a reputation that made folks cross the street when they saw him approach. Officer Garrett Keene was known to have a chip on his shoulder, an attitude, and a particular disdain for troublemakers, or who he deemed to be troublemakers. He was in his mid-30s, imposing in build, with sharp eyes that could freeze someone in their tracks. The rumor mill claimed he'd once roughed up a 14-year-old boy for skipping class. Another rumor said he'd pepper-sprayed an elderly woman who refused to move away from a protest line. Nothing was proven, nothing was on record, but the stories lingered like a foul odor in the community's collective memory. Brianna had encountered Officer Keene twice before. The first time, she was with friends at the local park. He walked by, gave them a threatening glare, and muttered something about staying out of trouble. The second time, she was walking home from the youth center at twilight. He'd pulled up beside her in his cruiser, asked her what she was doing out so late, and demanded to see her student ID. She offered it politely, confusion etched on her face. He sneered, handed it back, and drove off with the siren blaring. Those experiences, while brief, unnerved her. Yet, with her mother's counsel of politeness and caution, she tried not to escalate. She believed, naively some might say, that as long as you showed respect, you might get respect in return. But the day that changed her life began like any other. It was a Monday. The morning air hummed with the subtle chirping of birds as she jogged to school, wearing her Crestwood High jersey over a sweatshirt. She had basketball practice after class, then planned to stay late at the library to finish a report on civil rights law. In her mind, it was a small step toward that dream of becoming an attorney. Little did she know a storm was brewing, and by the end of that day, everything she believed about justice, fairness, and respect would be shattered in one cruel stroke. Basketball practice ended around 5:30 p.m. The gym's fluorescent lights were beginning to flicker on as the sun dipped below the horizon. Brianna and her best friend, Chloe Sanchez, stayed behind for a few extra shots. They laughed, teased each other, and made half-court attempts, only occasionally sinking a lucky shot. Coach Bennett reminded them to lock up and return the key to the main office before heading out. Crestwood's campus was mostly empty when the two girls finally left the locker room. The hallways were eerily silent, the kind of quiet that made every shoe squeak echo. Once they returned the key, they said goodbye in the parking lot. Chloe's older brother was already waiting in a battered old sedan, impatiently honking. Brianna waved them off, then set off on foot. It was about a 20-minute walk home, but she didn't mind. Walking helped clear her head. Halfway through her walk, Brianna spotted something strange on the corner of Cedar and Oakwood. Stood a local drugstore, Davy's Pharmacy. The usual bustle of customers was absent, and the lights inside seemed dimmer than normal. The front door was slightly ajar. At first, she wondered if Mr. Davies had just stepped out for a moment. He was known to keep the door open for fresh air. But something didn't feel right. She slowed her pace, peering more closely. Inside, she saw an older woman lying on the floor, motionless. Panic seized her heart. She couldn't see blood from her vantage point, but the woman's posture looked all wrong. Then Brianna's eyes caught a flicker of movement near the cash register. In the next moment, it felt like fate itself conspired against her. A shadowy figure in dark clothing bolted out of the pharmacy, a bulging plastic bag in one hand. Shocked, Brianna stumbled backward, her basketball duffel bag falling to the ground. She took a few steps away, her mind racing to figure out what to do. Should she run for help? Call 911. She didn't own a cell phone, but she could run back to the school and use the office phone if the door was still open. Before she could act, she heard the screech of tires. A police cruiser whipped around the corner and slammed to a halt. The lights blazed, followed by the thunderous bark of a megaphone. Stop right there. Brianna froze. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. From the driver's seat emerged none other than Officer Garrett Keene, his eyes burning with suspicion and that familiar scorn. He advanced on her, gun drawn, as the real suspect disappeared into the darkness behind the pharmacy. Hands in the air, Keene shouted, his voice echoing off the quiet street. I didn't. Shut your mouth. Hands up. Trembling, Brianna raised her hands. She felt a swirl of confusion and terror. The older woman in the pharmacy was still on the floor, possibly injured or worse. The actual criminal had run off. Yet here she was, in the officer's crosshairs. Keene approached, saw her basketball jersey peeking from under her hoodie, and sneered. So this is what you do after practice? Robbing pharmacies? No. I swear I was just. Without warning, he grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder. She's got the stolen goods, he muttered into his radio. Suspect in custody. Brianna's mind whirled. Stolen goods? She had nothing on her but her phoneless pocket, some chapstick, and her house key. She tried to protest, but Keene shoved her to the ground, pinning her face against the cold pavement. Even pinned, she could see through the open pharmacy doors. The older woman was moving slightly, as though regaining consciousness. A trail of chaos lay between the aisles, spilled medication bottles, scattered receipts. A roll of bandages had unfurled near the door. Everything screamed that a crime had taken place, but not by her. The entire scene blurred. The next thing she knew, she was wrenched to her feet and handcuffed. Sirens wailed in the distance. Backup was arriving. When Officer Holloway, a man Brianna recognized from community events, hurried over, she summoned the courage to speak. There was someone else. Brianna gasped, tears blurring her vision. They ran that way. Please, I didn't do anything. But Holloway glanced uncertainly at Keene, who stood tall with one hand on his holster and an arrogant smirk on his lips. Found at the scene, Holloway, Keene declared. Bag full of stolen items, too. He held up a plastic bag with the Davies Pharmacy logo. Brianna's mind reeled. Where had that come from? Everything was happening so fast. Holloway eyed the bag, then gave Brianna a pitying glance. We'll get a statement at the station, he muttered. Brianna tried to protest again, but Keen shoved her toward the back of the squad car. "Save it, Miss Hoops," he said mockingly. "You can talk all you want behind bars." Terror swallowed her whole. She managed to sputter, "I need to call my mom." Keen gave a sarcastic shrug. "We'll see if you get a phone call." The car door slammed shut. Through the tinted window, Brianna watched the lights of the pharmacy fade away, replaced by the swirling red and blue from the cruiser's roof. She felt both numb and frantic, trying to figure out how she'd explain this. She was an honor student. She was on the basketball team. She had never stolen anything in her life. She'd certainly never harmed anyone. Yet here she was, handcuffed, pinned with a pharmacy robbery, and about to be taken to the station. As they drove off, she could see Officer Keen's profile in the front seat. The grin never left his face, a smug satisfaction that oozed from every pore. Brianna's life as she'd known it was over in a flash, and she had no idea what awaited her in the shadowy corridors of Crestwood's justice system. The holding cell at the Crestwood police station smelled of bleach, cold metal, and hopelessness. Brianna had been fingerprinted, photographed, and told to wait. Her nerves buzzed with dread. She was sure once her mother arrived, this would get sorted out. There had to be some mistake. Someone would see the truth, or at least investigate thoroughly. It was nearly 2 hours before Laura Coleman was allowed in to see her daughter. Laura had been at the hospital finishing her shift when she got the call from an indifferent-sounding officer. She didn't know the details, only that her daughter was being held for questioning. She bolted out the door, still in her scrubs, heart pounding with maternal fear. When Laura rushed into the station, a young officer with a kind face, Officer Ramirez, guided her to a small, gray-walled interview room. There Brianna sat, hunched over, her hands trembling. Laura enveloped her child in a tight embrace, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. "Baby, what happened? Are you hurt?" Laura asked, her voice quivering. Brianna shook her head. "I'm fine physically, Mom. They think I robbed Davies' pharmacy. They say I attacked Mrs. Davies. That's not true. I saw someone else running." Laura stroked her daughter's braids, trying to stay steady. "She'll calm down. I believe you, baby. We'll fix this." Just then, the door opened, and Officer Keen entered with an air of entitlement, followed by Officer Holloway, who lingered near the back. Keen sat down, glancing disdainfully at Laura and Brianna. "Mrs. Coleman, your daughter is being held in connection with a violent robbery. We have reason to believe she stole from Davies' pharmacy and assaulted the owner." Laura's eyes widened. "You can't be serious. She's 16, for God's sake. She wouldn't hurt anyone." Keen shrugged. "We have the stolen merchandise, prescription drugs, found on her person. Mrs. Davies is in the hospital with a head injury. She claims a tall figure in a hood attacked her. Your daughter's about that height, and we found her at the scene." Brianna jumped up, her voice trembling with frustration. "I was outside. I saw someone run out. You showed up and arrested me before I could do anything. That bag you're talking about isn't mine." Keen slammed his hand on the table, making both Laura and Brianna flinch. "Sit down. You think you can just walk away from this because you're a kid?" Officer Holloway stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Keen's shoulder. "Garrett, calm down. We need to follow procedure." Laura glared at Keen. "I won't let you bully my daughter." In response, Keen leaned in, his face twisted with contempt. "The evidence speaks for itself. She'll be transferred to juvenile detention while we investigate." Laura stood, her nurse's scrubs still smeared with the day's routine wear. "I need to call a lawyer." Keen paused, a slow grin forming. "Go ahead, do that. But until a judge says otherwise, she stays in custody." Brianna wanted to scream, to beg them to investigate further, to comb through the security cameras at Davies' pharmacy. But she saw the look in Keen's eyes, a cunning, hateful glare that told her he'd do everything in his power to pin this on her. It was personal. She didn't know why, but from that moment, she knew Officer Keen was the enemy. Laura couldn't afford a top-tier lawyer, but she called the best local defense attorney she could find who was willing to handle juvenile cases, David Peterson. He was an old friend of the family, a decent man who believed in justice. Within an hour, he arrived, breathless, paperwork clutched in his hands. They all sat in the cramped interview room, David flipping through documents the officers provided, his brow furrowed as he read the charges. Armed robbery, possession of a controlled substance with intent, assault on an elderly individual. "This is serious, Laura." Laura pressed her lips together, tears threatening. "You know Brianna, David. This can't be right." David nodded. I'm going to request the security footage from Davy's pharmacy. They have cameras, correct? Officer Holloway, standing near the door, cleared his throat. Yes. The footage was apparently damaged during the robbery. The camera was smashed. How convenient, David muttered. Well, we can still see if anything is recoverable. And there might be nearby businesses with external cameras. Brianna's chest tightened with a mixture of relief and worry. Relief that David believed her enough to look for evidence. Worry that the actual robber might have covered their tracks too well. Keene glanced at David dismissively. Good luck with that. In the meantime, the juvenile court hearing is set for tomorrow morning. If the judge denies bail, she'll remain in the county juvenile facility until trial. Laura clasped Brianna's hand. I'll be there first thing. We won't let them railroad you. When it was time for Laura to leave, she embraced Brianna, whispering in her ear, I love you. Be strong. This will all be over soon. As the door closed behind Laura and David, Brianna felt an overwhelming wave of loneliness. She was a child, but in that moment, she realized the adult world could be cruel and unforgiving, and she was trapped in its crosshairs. Laura went home to an empty house, her mind swirling with questions and fears. As she sank onto the sofa, her eyes landed on an old photo album. She closed her eyes, remembering a time years ago when Brianna was just a toddler. Back then, Laura had not felt quite so alone. In a moment of desperation, she picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in a long time. The line rang and rang before going to voicemail. Heart pounding, she left a brief message. This is Laura. I need your help. It's about Brianna. She's in trouble. She hung up, unsure if she'd done the right thing. The father of her child, Michael Ashton, had left their lives so long ago under a shroud of secrecy. She had respected his reasons, but now that Brianna was in danger, Laura didn't care about old promises. She needed every ounce of help she could get. Night draped the house in silence. Laura hardly slept, her thoughts a carousel of worry. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted off on the couch. The next morning dawned gray and ominous, as though the weather itself anticipated the gravity of the court hearing. Laura and David Peterson arrived at the juvenile courthouse early. Brianna was brought in, looking tired and frightened in borrowed clothes. The hearing was brief, too brief. The prosecution insisted they had strong evidence, including eyewitness statements from Mrs. Davies and the recovered stolen items. David argued for bail, citing Brianna's clean record and strong community ties. Judge Pritchard, a stern woman in her 50s, listened quietly before deciding. Given the severity of the charges, I'm inclined to proceed with caution. However, the defendant is a minor with no previous offenses. I will grant supervised bail under house arrest. The defendant is to wear an ankle monitor and remain home except for court dates and meetings with her attorney. Relief washed over Laura. She could bring her daughter home, but the victory was bittersweet. Brianna would be confined, possibly for months, awaiting the outcome of a trial that could send her to juvenile detention or worse. Still, it was better than the alternative. They returned home. The police fitted Brianna's ankle monitor, and she settled into a tense routine of scheduled check-ins. Over the next few days, David worked tirelessly. He combed through every piece of evidence the prosecution presented. It was as if everything had been gift-wrapped to point directly to Brianna. Partial fingerprints on the stolen items, vague and inconclusive, her presence at the scene, and Mrs. Davies' statement that the attacker was young and wearing a hoodie. David found it odd that no conclusive camera footage existed from the pharmacy or from the neighboring shops. Several cameras were mysteriously offline or damaged. The only camera that had been functional that night belonged to a nearby bank, but the footage was compromised by glare from street lights. You could see the pharmacy, but not the face or race of the individual running out. Brianna spent her days in anxious boredom, trying to keep up with homework and ignoring the social media storm swirling around her. News of her arrest had spread across Crestwood High. Many classmates posted supportive messages, but others ridiculed her or claimed she was guilty. In the midst of this turmoil, Laura's phone buzzed late one evening. She answered, half asleep. A calm male voice spoke on the other line. Laura, it's me. Her breath caught. You got my message? Yeah. I'm sorry I didn't pick up sooner. Tell me what's happening. Laura explained the situation, tears choking her voice at times. She told him about the robbery, Brianna's arrest, Officer Keene, the suspicious evidence, and the upcoming trial. The man listened intently. I'll do whatever I can, he said finally. I have connections, Laura. Let me make some calls. But understand, I may have to involve certain people at the Department of Justice. Laura swallowed, recalling the day he had left. If that's what it takes to save her, do it. Please, I'm begging you. I'll get back to you soon, he said. Then the line went dead. Laura stared at the phone, her hands trembling. She hadn't heard his voice in over a decade, but right now, none of that mattered. A flicker of hope blossomed in her chest. Perhaps this was the lifeline Brianna needed. Little did she know that her desperate phone call had set into motion a series of events more explosive than she could ever imagine. Because the man on the other end of the line, Michael Ashton, was no ordinary father, and his reemergence into Brianna's life would send shock waves through Crestwood's corrupt underbelly, culminating in a courtroom showdown that none would soon forget. A week passed, each day feeling longer than the last. Brianna's case was set for a pre-trial hearing in 2 weeks, and David Peterson was busy building her defense. Despite his best efforts, evidence in her favor remained elusive. One afternoon, the Colemans received an unexpected visitor. A sleek black SUV pulled up in front of their small home. Out stepped 2 individuals in crisp suits, accompanied by a local officer who looked decidedly nervous. Laura opened the door, suspicious. "Can I help you?" A woman in her early 40s with a confident posture extended her hand. "My name is Special Agent Lena Hamilton from the Department of Justice. This is my colleague, Agent Marcus Vance. We'd like to speak with you and Brianna, if that's possible." Laura's heart fluttered. She glanced at the local officer, who gave an apologetic shrug. This was unprecedented. Why would the DOJ be involved in a local robbery case? Unless— "Sure, come in," Laura managed, stepping aside. They gathered in the living room. Brianna sat on the couch, arms folded, the ankle monitor a stark reminder of her predicament. Agent Hamilton observed her with gentle eyes, while Agent Vance surveyed the room methodically. Laura broke the silence. "Why is the DOJ interested in my daughter's case?" Agent Hamilton exchanged a glance with Agent Vance, then answered, "We're conducting a broader investigation into allegations of corruption within the Crestwood Police Department. Your daughter's arrest and the circumstances surrounding it have raised some red flags." Brianna's eyes widened. "You mean, you think they planted evidence?" Hamilton nodded thoughtfully. "It's a possibility. We can't share all the details of our investigation, but we have reasons to believe that certain officers in Crestwood have been involved in falsifying reports, excessive force, and framing. Your daughter's case may be a prime example." Laura felt a surge of hope. "So, you're here to help us?" Agent Vance set a small folder on the coffee table. "We can't intervene directly in the local prosecution. However, we can provide assistance if we find evidence that her civil rights were violated. We're also authorized to monitor the case and ensure no misconduct is taking place." Brianna looked up, tears glistening. "They just grabbed me, said I did it, and found a bag of stolen stuff on me. But I never had that bag." Agent Hamilton offered a sympathetic nod. "That's consistent with other allegations we're hearing, evidence being planted to justify arrests. We'd like your permission to review the case files, talk to your attorney, and possibly interview you further." "Of course," Laura said immediately. "Whatever you need." The meeting lasted an hour, during which they discussed details of the arrest, Brianna's account of events, and Officer Keene's history of alleged misconduct. Agent Hamilton and Agent Vance took meticulous notes. Their presence felt both comforting and surreal, like a lifeline in the middle of a storm. When they left, Agent Hamilton paused at the front door. "We'll be in touch soon. In the meantime, stay vigilant. If anything suspicious happens, call us directly." She handed Laura a business card bearing the DOJ seal and her direct line. Laura watched them leave, heart pounding with cautious optimism. This was the first real sign that the system might not be stacked entirely against them. That evening, Laura's phone rang again. She recognized the same out-of-state number from before. "I'm in town," the man said simply. "I'd like to see you and Brianna." Laura didn't hesitate. "Yes, we could use you right now. But be careful. The police are crawling all over, and the DOJ just left." He let out a surprised chuckle. "DOJ, huh? Didn't think they'd catch wind so fast. I'm at the Crestwood Inn. Let's meet at the new diner downtown, Grant's Diner on Maple Street, tonight around 9. Laura agreed, though a knot of anxiety twisted in her stomach. She hung up and turned to Brianna, who was in the kitchen trying to salvage her homework routine. "Brianna, we're meeting someone tonight," Laura said cautiously. "Who?" Laura hesitated. Your father. Brianna's eyes went wide. She nearly dropped her pencil. 1,000 questions bubbled up, but for a moment, she was too shocked to ask any of them. Her father? The man she'd never met, never known, never even seen a picture of? What? What do you mean he's here? Laura nodded, her voice trembling. Yes, he got my message, and he's here to help. Why would he help now, after all these years? Laura sighed, tears threatening. He had reasons to stay away. But I trust him. Brianna wasn't sure what to think. Rage, confusion, curiosity, they all bubbled inside her. But given the nightmare she was living, she felt a flicker of hope that maybe this mysterious father could bring answers. At 8:45 p.m., mother and daughter drove downtown to Grant's Diner. The neon sign buzzed overhead, reflecting on the parked cars. Inside, the diner was nearly empty except for a tired waitress refilling salt shakers and a couple finishing their late-night meal. In a corner booth sat a tall man with a close-cropped beard, wearing a simple black jacket. His posture was confident, but his expression softened when he saw Laura and Brianna. They approached tentatively. Laura slid into the booth, and Brianna hesitated before following. The man's dark eyes flicked over Brianna's face, lighting up with recognition that made the girl's heart ache with unfamiliar longing. Laura spoke first. Brianna, this is Michael Ashton. Michael interjected softly. Or Mike, if you prefer. I'm your father, Brianna. Brianna almost laughed at the cruel coincidence of her own last name matching the pharmacy owner's, but she realized quickly that Davies was the owner. Her mind spun, and she managed a polite nod, though she couldn't speak. Mike cleared his throat. I'm sorry I wasn't around. I had my reasons, but right now, none of that matters. I'm here to help you in any way I can. Laura glanced at him. It's bigger than we thought. The DOJ is investigating, but we don't know if they'll be able to clear her name before the trial. We need all the help we can get. Mike nodded, taking a sip of water. I'm not just some guy off the street, Brianna. I work for the federal government. In fact, I've worked with the DOJ on several major civil rights cases. Brianna blinked. You're a federal agent? He grimaced. Not exactly. I'm a special counsel who's been on undercover assignments for years. My job sometimes involves infiltration of corrupt organizations or local police departments suspected of wrongdoing. That's why I had to leave. My work is dangerous, and I couldn't risk having a family in the crosshairs. Brianna's heart pounded. She wanted to lash out, to demand why he didn't trust them enough to stay. But the desperation of her own situation subdued her rage. Instead, she stared down at the table. Laura placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. He knows the system, Brianna. We can use that. Mike nodded. I can't guarantee miracles, but I have connections at the DOJ. I've already made a few calls. They're sending more investigators to Crestwood. If there's evidence of corruption or framing, we'll find it. For a moment, the three of them sat in silence. Then the waitress ambled over, took their order in a perfunctory manner, and returned to the kitchen. Brianna finally mustered the courage to speak. So, you're some kind of secret agent? And you left us because it was dangerous? You had to pretend we didn't exist so the bad guys wouldn't come after us. Mike opened his mouth, closed it, then spoke quietly. Yes, it's not an excuse, just the truth. She studied him, seeing her own eyes and nose reflected in his features. Well, she said with a shaky breath, thanks for showing up now. His voice caught. I wish it wasn't under these circumstances. They spent the next hour discussing strategy. Mike assured them he'd provide David Peterson with additional leads, investigative techniques, and maybe a heads up from the DOJ's higher ranks. He was cautiously optimistic that the local system wouldn't be able to withstand federal scrutiny if they were truly framing Brianna. Still, a kernel of doubt nagged at Brianna. Could this father she never knew really shield her from the malicious might of Officer Keene and anyone else who stood to benefit from her downfall? She had to believe it was possible, because the alternative was too horrifying to bear. When they left the diner, Laura and Mike shared a moment of silent understanding. Brianna walked slightly ahead, not quite ready to process the father-daughter dynamic. Mike promised to keep them updated and discreetly parted ways. Laura drove Brianna home, the air thick with tension and unspoken words. The next few days passed in a whirlwind. Mike called in a favor from a contact named Lisa Monaco, the Deputy Attorney General under the current administration, who had the authority to expedite certain aspects of the DOJ's investigation. Brianna's case garnered more attention, and soon local media started asking questions about potential misconduct by Officer Garrett Keene. Keene, naturally, was furious. He confronted David Peterson in the hallway of the courthouse after a brief hearing. "Who the hell do you think you are, trying to get the feds involved?" he spat. David didn't flinch. "I'm just doing my job, Officer Keene. You do yours. If you truly have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to worry about." Keene's nostrils flared. He jabbed a finger at David's chest. "You're messing with the wrong department. Mark my words, I'm going to see this case through, and that girl will go away for a long time." David stared him down with a composed dignity that only inflamed Keene's anger further. The officer stormed off, leaving David both worried and resolute. He hurried into the courtroom to find Brianna and Laura, wanting to make sure they were safe. As the day of the official trial approached, tension wrapped around the Coleman household like barbed wire. Laura barely slept. Brianna tried to study, but her mind drifted constantly to worst-case scenarios. David worked around the clock, scouring for any new evidence and consulting with Mike behind the scenes. Mike, for his part, was tightening the net, coordinating with agents from outside Crestwood to gather testimonies from potential victims of police corruption. In the midst of this, the disquieting question remained. Would they find the concrete proof they needed in time to save Brianna from a grave injustice? Finally, the trial began. The local courthouse was abuzz with reporters, curious onlookers, and activists who had heard rumors of potential police framing. The judge presiding was again the stern Judge Pritchard. Court officers lined the walls, ensuring order. Brianna sat at the defense table, hands clammy, heart pounding. She was dressed in a modest blouse and skirt, hair neatly braided. Laura sat behind her, flanked by neighbors and friends who came to offer moral support. On the other side, Officer Keene loomed in uniform, exuding smug confidence. The district attorney, a middle-aged man named Robert Hansen, towered next to him. Day one of the trial started with opening statements. Hansen painted Brianna as a troubled teen. He emphasized that while she had no prior record, hidden behaviors could erupt under stress. He described the elderly Mrs. Davies' horrifying account of being struck in the head with a blunt object and robbed of prescription drugs and cash. David countered by highlighting Brianna's impeccable record, her strong community ties, and the suspicious circumstances of her arrest. He insisted that the evidence had been planted and that the real culprit had fled the scene. Witnesses were called. Mrs. Davies, still recovering, testified that she'd been attacked by someone wearing a hooded sweatshirt. She admitted she never saw the attacker's face clearly but claimed the physique could be Brianna's. When David pressed her on whether she was absolutely sure, Mrs. Davies grew flustered. I can't say for certain," she admitted. "Officer Keene told me they caught the girl outside with the drugs." Officer Holloway testified next. He hesitated on the stand, glancing nervously at Keene, who sat in the gallery. I arrived after the fact. Officer Keene had already detained Miss Coleman. He showed me a bag of prescription bottles he said he'd found on her." Holloway appeared uneasy, as though he might reveal more if not for fear of retaliation. Then came the prosecution's star witness, Officer Garrett Keene himself. He took the stand with a swagger. Under direct examination by D.A. Hansen, Keene testified that he had been responding to a tip of suspicious activity near the pharmacy and arrived just in time to see Brianna emerge from the building. Brianna's jaw dropped. That was a bald-faced lie. She had never set foot inside. But David placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, instructing her to remain calm. Keene continued his fabrications. "She had a bag of drugs in her hand. I told her to stop. She tried to run, but I apprehended her." The bag clearly belonged to Davies' pharmacy. When David rose to cross-examine Keene, tension spiked in the courtroom. David approached the officer calmly. "Officer Keene, you claim you witnessed my client leaving the pharmacy. What time exactly did you receive this tip?" Keene narrowed his eyes. "It was around 5:45, maybe 5:50 p.m. David nodded. "And you arrived on scene within minutes, right?" "Around 6 o'clock. David took a piece of paper from his file and handed it to Keene. "This is the dispatch record from the Crestwood Police Department. It shows that you only called in at 6:10 p.m., stating you had a suspect in custody. There's no record of an earlier radio communication about suspicious activity." Keene bristled. "We were having issues with the radio. My first call didn't go through." "How convenient," David said, letting the sarcasm drip. "Let's talk about that bag of prescription drugs. Did you properly log the evidence that same evening?" Keene hesitated. Yes, I did. Right after we took her in. David slid another document onto the overhead projector, showing the evidence log. According to this log, the items were logged at 7:30 p.m., 2 hours after you claimed to have recovered them. No reason was provided for the delay. Keene's face twisted. Paperwork backlog. It happens. The prosecution objected, calling David's line of questioning irrelevant, but the judge allowed him to continue, albeit briefly. Officer Keene, David said, stepping closer. Is it not true that there have been multiple complaints filed against you for excessive force and allegations of planted evidence? Objection, Your Honor. D.A. Hansen rose. This is character assassination. These complaints were never substantiated. Judge Pritchard squinted. Mr. Peterson, you need to tread carefully. Is this line of questioning relevant to the alleged framing of Miss Coleman? David nodded. Yes, Your Honor. We are establishing a pattern of behavior. The judge allowed a few more questions, but David knew he couldn't push too hard without actual proof. So he finished by highlighting the inconsistencies in Keene's statements. As Keene stepped off the stand, his expression was thunderous. After the first day ended, Laura and Brianna felt slightly hopeful. David had poked holes in the prosecution's narrative, but the case was far from one. On day 2, David put Brianna on the stand. She told her story, how she had finished basketball practice, walked home, spotted the pharmacy door ajar, and saw someone run out, how Officer Keene arrived and arrested her without listening. The prosecution tried to paint her as unreliable, but she stayed composed and consistent. Then, in a dramatic turn, David called a surprise witness, Special Agent Lena Hamilton from the DOJ. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. A DOJ agent? This wasn't typical for a local robbery trial. Agent Hamilton strode to the stand in a crisp navy suit, her demeanor composed. After taking the oath, David began. Agent Hamilton, can you describe your role with the Department of Justice? I'm part of a federal task force investigating potential civil rights violations and corruption within local police departments. Our mission is to determine whether certain officers have engaged in unconstitutional practices. Have you investigated the Crestwood Police Department? She nodded. Yes. We've received credible allegations that certain officers in Crestwood have a pattern of excessive force, fabricating evidence, and discriminatory practices. Officer Keene is one of the names repeatedly mentioned in complaints. A collective gasp spread throughout the courtroom. D.A. Hansen leaped to his feet, objecting on grounds of relevance and prejudice. Judge Pritchard allowed David to continue, but warned him to remain focused on Brianna's case. Agent Hamilton produced redacted copies of complaints filed against Keene, including sworn statements from individuals claiming he planted drugs during routine stops. The judge allowed the documents to be admitted as evidence, albeit with some caution. Furious, D.A. Hansen cross-examined Agent Hamilton. Have any of these complaints been proven in a court of law? She shook her head. Not yet, but that's why we're investigating. That's speculation, Agent Hamilton. We need tangible proof that Miss Coleman was framed. Do you have that? She hesitated, glancing at David. He gave a subtle nod. We've been reviewing traffic camera footage from the surrounding area, as well as data from the pharmacy alarm system, which wasn't fully disabled. The prosecution objected again, demanding to see any such evidence in advance. The judge ordered a brief recess to allow the defense to present new evidence to both the court and the DA. During the recess, David and Agent Hamilton huddled with Laura, Brianna, and Mike, who had quietly entered the courtroom that morning. A flicker of tension passed between Mike and Laura, but they set aside personal matters to focus on the bigger picture. Mike revealed a bombshell. We found an eyewitness. A homeless man who was behind the pharmacy. He saw a tall male figure in dark clothing run out of the pharmacy before Brianna even arrived. Agent Hamilton interviewed him yesterday. Brianna's heart leaped. That's it then. That proves I wasn't the robber. David nodded cautiously. It'll help if the judge admits it as testimony. But we need to be careful. The prosecution will claim he's unreliable or try to discredit him. Still, it's something. When court resumed, David announced he had an additional witness, Mr. Gerald Watson, to testify about the events at the pharmacy. A tall, gaunt man with disheveled hair took the stand, looking uncertain but determined. Under oath, Gerald explained he had been behind the pharmacy, rummaging through the dumpster for recyclables. He heard screams, then saw a figure run out of the back entrance. He described the figure as definitely not a teenage girl, more like a grown man. or at least older. Gerald saw Brianna arrive moments later in the front of the pharmacy. He insisted she wasn't the one who came running out. When asked if he had informed the police, Gerald admitted he was afraid they wouldn't believe a homeless man, especially if it contradicted an officer's word. Hansen tried to discredit him, pointing out his homelessness and lack of stable employment, but David retorted, "The truth can come from anyone, regardless of status." The courtroom atmosphere changed drastically. The possibility that the real thief was still at large now loomed large, casting doubt on the entire case against Brianna. Sensing the momentum shift, the prosecution pivoted. They tried to argue that Brianna could have worked with this unknown accomplice, but that theory lacked evidence. Just when it seemed Brianna's defense had struck a critical blow, David made one final power move. "Your Honor, I'd like to call my last witness, a high-level DOJ official with direct knowledge of law enforcement corruption. He's prepared to give statements regarding a federal investigation involving Officer Keene." All eyes turned to the back of the courtroom as Michael Ashton rose. Brianna's breath caught. Here it was, the moment she dreaded and anticipated all at once. Her father stepping into the public eye to defend her. Mike took the stand, identified himself as a special counsel affiliated with federal investigations into civil rights violations. The prosecution objected, citing lack of prior disclosure of this witness, but Judge Pritchard allowed it, given the significance of potential exculpatory evidence. Mike explained how multiple departments across the region had been under scrutiny. Officer Keene's name came up frequently in investigations for falsifying evidence. The DOJ has initiated proceedings for deeper inquiry into the Crestwood PD. DA Hansen tried to rattle him. "You claim to be a special counsel, but where's your proof? And what direct knowledge do you have of Miss Coleman's innocence?" Mike calmly produced a signed affidavit referencing his clearance level and the nature of the inquiries he'd conducted. "While I cannot divulge all of my operations, I can confirm that forensic evidence regarding the stolen pharmaceuticals does not match Miss Coleman's fingerprints or DNA, beyond a partial that appears to be inconsistent with a complete set." David approached the bench, handing documents to the judge and to Hansen. "This is new evidence from the DOJ. They conducted a specialized analysis confirming that the prime set of prints on the stolen pill bottles belonged to an adult male. The partial print attributed to Brianna was likely transferred onto the surface afterwards, suggesting it was planted." A hush fell over the courtroom. Judge Pritchard's expression was stern but thoughtful. "Is this verified by your laboratory technicians?" she asked Mike. He nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The tension was palpable. Keene, seated behind the prosecution table, had turned deathly pale, his jaw clenched so tightly it seemed about to snap. Finally, Judge Pritchard cleared her throat. "I will allow this evidence. Given what I've heard and seen, I find it highly plausible that Miss Coleman may have been framed or is at least not the principal actor in this crime. Unless the prosecution has further conclusive evidence, I'm inclined to dismiss the charges." Chaos erupted. The gallery burst into chatter. Laura wept with relief, hugging Brianna. The DA, looking defeated, stumbled through a weak protest, but the judge silenced him. "In the interest of justice," Judge Pritchard declared, banging her gavel, "the charges against Brianna Coleman are hereby dismissed. This court will not tolerate false accusations and potential corruption by law enforcement. Officer Keene's conduct will be subject to an internal and possibly federal investigation." The crowd exploded. Some cheered. Some reporters dashed out to file stories. Others glared at Keene with contempt. Brianna felt her entire body go limp with relief. Tears streamed down her face as she embraced Laura, who whispered, "Thank God, baby. Thank God." Mike stood nearby, a proud half-smile tugging at his lips. Despite the awkwardness of their situation, father and daughter shared a moment of unspoken understanding. Keene, enraged, stormed out of the courtroom. The clang of the doors echoed through the halls. His day of reckoning would soon follow, an investigation that would expose everything he tried to hide. But for Brianna, the nightmare was finally over. Or so it seemed. Little did she know, fate had one final twist of karma waiting for the cop who had tried to ruin her life. Several weeks passed. Brianna tried to return to a normal life, going to basketball practice, catching up on her studies, and savoring the sweet relief of freedom. Yet everywhere she went, people whispered about the trial. Some apologized for ever doubting her. Others turned their scrutiny to Officer Keene. The Department of Justice launched a formal investigation into Keen's conduct. Statements poured in from people who claimed he'd planted evidence, used excessive force, or threatened them. His record was more damning than anyone had suspected. One bright afternoon, Laura was at the hospital finishing a shift when she noticed a buzz of commotion outside. An ambulance pulled up, and in it was Officer Keen, lying on a stretcher with severe injuries. Laura later learned the story from paramedics. In a bizarre twist of fate, Keen had been pursuing a suspect in a routine traffic stop gone wrong. He chased the suspect into the woods near the highway, tripped, and fallen down a ravine, breaking multiple bones. Rumors flew that the suspect had also turned on him. Some said it was a scuffle. Others speculated it was just bad luck. Either way, Keen was critically injured. Laura hesitated, recalling how mercilessly he had treated her daughter. But she was a nurse first. When the ER staff rushed to treat him, she did her job professionally, providing the care he needed. As Keen lay in a hospital bed, helpless and in pain, a federal agent arrived to serve him with an arrest warrant charging him with multiple counts of evidence tampering, civil rights violations, and perjury. The irony was not lost on anyone. He had devoted so much energy to harming others, and now he was the one powerless, looking at a future behind bars. Brianna struggled with the news. Part of her wanted to see him pay. Part of her felt a pang of pity for a man so consumed by hate and corruption that it ultimately destroyed him. She found herself reflecting on how quickly a life could unravel. Meanwhile, Mike quietly slipped out of Crestwood, returning to his work with the federal government. Before leaving, he visited Laura and Brianna one last time at their home. They spoke in hushed tones, acknowledging the healing they all needed. "I'm proud of you, Brianna," Mike said softly. "You stood strong through this nightmare." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for helping me. I guess I have a lot of questions about who you are, why you left. But maybe we can figure that out someday." He embraced his daughter for the first time in her life. It was awkward but genuine. Laura looked on with a mixture of sadness and hope. They might never be a traditional family, but at least the truth was no longer shrouded in secrecy. As Mike walked away, Brianna felt a rush of emotions. Anger at his absence, gratitude for his help, curiosity about his life. All of it mingled with relief that she was now free, that justice had been served. She returned to her everyday routine, picking up the threads of a life once interrupted. And in the quiet moments, late nights before bed or early mornings on her walk to school, she found herself reflecting on the entire ordeal. She realized the fight for justice was bigger than any single case or personal vendetta. It was a collective effort, a higher calling that demanded vigilance and courage. Her dreams of becoming a lawyer burned brighter than ever. One day, she vowed, she would be the one in that courtroom, defending the defenseless, ensuring that no one else ever had to endure what she'd gone through. And in the end, for Officer Keen, hard karma did indeed strike back. The man who'd once strutted with unchecked authority found himself bedridden, indicted, and disgraced, living proof that no amount of corruption could stand indefinitely against truth. Brianna's fight for freedom in Crestwood taught her that justice isn't guaranteed. It's something you stand up for, day after day. Her unwavering courage, bolstered by her mother's devotion and the unexpected help of her long-absent father, eventually exposed the cruel secrets hidden within a broken system. As the Department of Justice continued its investigation, one thing was clear. If you speak the truth, even when it costs you everything, people will listen. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. If you felt the tension, the triumph, and the twists in Brianna's story, then be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us shine a light on more stories of courage and perseverance. Turn on your notifications so you never miss a new video. And remember, when justice seems distant, keep fighting, because one voice can make all the difference.